Outline of Esoteric Science. Cassette 11, first side. Spiritualism and Psychism. This is one of the areas of experience where the contribution of modern theosophical teaching is especially informative and quite unique, and it is in plain language. No other literature covers the subject in the same depth nor to the same extent. Other religious or philosophical systems, such as those of the East or of the Kabbalah, treat of the subject, but wholly or partly in veiled terms and not as fully as theosophy. Spiritualist literature, apart from its numerous descriptions of phenomenal happenings, messages, etc., takes for granted their source and doesn't concern itself much with explanations, other than those purporting to come from the other side. The key data on which the theosophical explanations are based are A, the sevenfold constitution of man, B, the astral light, and C, elementals. Added to these are HPB's unique personal knowledge of the powers and processes behind the scenes and her own abilities to exercise them. These abilities in themselves were also quite unique among people living in the world in the last century, and possibly for some centuries before that. Certainly no one in this country has evinced such powers, nor her knowledge since her time. This isn't intended to be a eulogy of HPB, but while the mass of literature on this subject, much of which has enjoyed broad acceptance, is highly speculative and even contradictory in many areas, that of theosophy or esoteric science is authoritative and consistent throughout, but it has been virtually ignored, both by psychic investigators and scientists. In modern times, theosophy was reintroduced to the world by way of spiritualism. From about 1840 onwards, in the United States of America, there was considerable interest in spiritualism and psychic phenomena. It started in a town called Rochester, with table rappings and other happenings, then spread all over that country and thence to Europe. There seemed to be no shortage of mediums, of which seemingly many were fraudulent, but some were certainly not. The fraudulent ones, however, brought the movement into disrepute. Two of the more famous and genuine mediums of that time were Horatio and William Eddy of Chittenden, Vermont. And it was during an investigation of what was going on at the Eddy homestead in 1874 that Colonel Olcott met HPB. HPB witnessed and afterwards said that she affected or caused consciously and at will some of the phenomena. Through the two mediums, nearly everything that can happen at a spiritualist seance did happen. All this was to provide much material for a book by Colonel Olcott and for some of HPB's early writings. First, she defended many honest mediums against the charge of fraud. Then, slowly, she started to give out the occult explanations of the phenomena, according to her masters and her own knowledge. She declared unequivocally that the spirits of the dead were not involved. Key, chapter 2. This estranged her immediately from the spiritualists, and there were some notable ones, apart from the mediums, including professors, scientists, authors, and so on, of international reputation. Almost without exception, they would not, and still will not, believe her account of what occurs. She, however, used the word spirit in the sense in which it is always used in her writings to mean the spiritual triad in man, whereas the spiritualists applied it to any entity that was apparently behind seance phenomena. As we shall see, there is a variety of such entities, but none of them is the proper spirit of the departed. As we have seen on cassette, the ego, the real spirit, becomes dormant after death until the period of gestation is over. It then awakens to a conditioned consciousness in Devachan, but can in no wise communicate with earth, either directly or through a medium. It can, however, as we saw, be en rapport with other egos at its own level. This means that whatever manifests during a seance, apparently as the dead person, must be either the psychic remains of that person or some elemental effect. We must now look further at these possibilities. Further, we are told that the astral double disintegrates along with the physical body, and that the prana associated with the double disperses and returns to the general ocean of life force, jiva. This means that principles 1, 2, and 3 are no longer available as vehicles either to the ego nor to the surviving fourth, that is the karma, and lower fifth, manas, principles which comprise the man's mortal soul. We are left with this mortal soul, or karma manasic rupa, as a form in the karma loka. During the process of gestation, this form, we are told, is as a chrysalis, awaiting the emergence of the egoic butterfly. When this occurs, the spiritual content of the last personality's experience has been assimilated into the ego. After the emergence of the ego, the chrysalis is no more than a carapace, an empty shell, and this is the term used to describe the karma rupa now vacated by the ego. It should be noted particularly that the karma rupa, the body of desire and of the lower mind, does not become a separate entity until after death. It should also be noted that it is dormant during the gestation period, but thereafter it is said to recover some residual consciousness and memory of its former life. But the coordinating, active intelligence of the self-determined ego has then withdrawn and is about its own exclusive business at its own level. What is it, therefore, that can manifest or speak through a medium? First, there are the cases of those who died suddenly, prematurely, where all the principles are still intact, that is, except for the physical one, and in these cases, that is, those of accident or suicide, consciousness can, as we have seen, be retained. Although there can be no return to the physical body after the breaking of the silver cord, such a person is still a person, and not dead as far as the remaining principles are concerned. Such ones can and do communicate through a medium, and such communications are genuinely from the persons concerned. What happens in other cases? In all other cases, that is, during the karmalokic stay, the gestation period, when the ego is dormant, or during the devachan, after the ego has withdrawn from the lower vehicles, whatever may appear or be said cannot be from the deceased as a spiritual entity. What then can it be? It can only be from some simulacrum of the erstwhile man, possessed of some of his personal qualities. We must now remember the teachings about the astral light and elementals. In the astral light are stored the records, visual and auditory, of whatever has happened on earth in the whole of the present Manvantara. These pictures are unfading. This means that those of a person's whole life, from beginning to end, in all its detail, together with its environment and associates, are stored there. Then in the Kamaloka are the Kamarupas, the forms created by the desire nature of the deceased, which commonly assume the likeness of the physical body. Until its dissolution, this form has its fading memories, residual and lower mind intelligence, and some consciousness. All these can be revivified, either by vitality drawn from a medium, possibly supplemented from any sitters present, or by elementals. Sometimes this karma manasic ghost can retain enough of its own energy to remain a self-active entity. It is this that we have previously referred to as an elementary. Elementaries, being divorced from their higher principles, are lacking any conscience. They are completely amoral and irresponsible, and because the karma manasic aspects of a man's constitution are, in life, more often than not of the purest, elementaries reflect the worst of our natures, being often downright evil. This is corroborated by the following definition. Elementaries, properly the disembodied souls of the depraved, these souls having at some time prior to death separated from themselves their divine spirits and so lost their chance of immortality. But at the present stage of learning it has been thought best to apply the term to the spooks, or phantoms of disembodied persons in general, to those whose temporary habitation is the Kamaloka. Once divorced from their higher triads and their bodies, these souls remain in the Kamarupic envelopes and are irresistibly drawn to earth amid elements congenial to their gross natures. Their stay in Kamaloka varies as to its duration, but ends invariably in disintegration, dissolving like a column of mist, atom by atom, in the surrounding elements. That's from the Theosophical Glossary. We mention the elementaries here because of the part they can play in the seance room phenomena by using elementals to produce them. They can also psychically impress people sensitive to their vibrations, most often of a grossly bestial or cruel kind, and inspire, even compel them to quite irrational behavior of a similar nature. And perhaps we can now see what the nature of spiritualistic and even some so-called psychic manifestations, whether of materializations and of many other paranormal happenings, might be. First, apparitions may be pictures in the astral light evoked and made physically visible by a medium. Their nature would be determined by their association with anyone present, the sitters at the séance, or even with the medium. Secondly, they may be astral light pictures enlivened by elementals as centers of psychic force. Like elementaries, elementals are in themselves amoral and irresponsible, but they can take on the character of the deceased, residual in the elementary that they are enlivening. They are often mischievous, sometimes even dangerous, as in the case of poltergeists. They have access to the remaining memory and intelligence of the deceased, temporarily preserved in the Kama Rupa or indefinitely in the astral light. Not only can the manifestations so produced be of persons newly dead, but of people who lived and died centuries or even millennia ago. In such cases, ancient instruments can be played, archaic languages spoken, an intimate knowledge of the past evinced, and so on. Elementals can, and often do, impersonate lofty beings, godlike figures, historical personages, assuming an imperious, authoritative attitude and speech, deluding sitters that they are the impressive presence of the great, of high spiritual beings, even deity. Thirdly, spiritualistic manifestations, whether by apparition, voice, or automatic writing, etc., can reflect the thoughts, the mental content, actively expressed or not, of the people present, including the medium. In this way, a remarkable knowledge of current events can be evinced. A knowledge of the future, in terms of a person's immediate circumstances, is demonstrated in the messages for, or advice given to, those present. Pictures of future events, which will result from past or present causes, are cast into the astral light and can be seen by a clairvoyant, or sensed by a medium, even be impressed upon the elementals. People can then be told they are shortly going on a journey, or whether they will pass or fail an impending examination, or that he or she is going to meet a dark, handsome stranger. In many cases, such predictions come true. Similarly, messages can come through which indicate things that have happened or are happening at a distance. Much of the content of these messages can convince believing communicants that their dear dead friends or relatives must be their source, because no one else could have such detailed knowledge of their affairs. In spite of what is said above, sometimes, but rarely, spiritualistic messages remarkable for their high wisdom and teaching do occur, and it is possible, but in the ordinary way most improbable, for higher entities, discarnate or not, to come through and utter weighty prophecies or teachings of real spiritual or other value. Much discrimination is therefore needed, but the latter occurrences are very rare. For example, much so-called spirit teaching is pure platitude, even though possibly very high-toned, but no more so than anyone with high principles and a knowledge of the right literature could utter. The more pompous and grandiose the utterance, the more elevated the status assumed by the entity, the more we should beware. Such is a brief outline of the possible explanations of some of the commoner spiritualistic communications. In the case of materializations, the process is much the same. The bodily image of the visitor is usually an astral light or kama rupa image, enlivened and animated by elementals. The material for the apparition is drawn from the medium, who loses weight as the phantom gains it. The phantom is a shell only, a covering, void of content. So much, however, can dynamic life be simulated that even the heartbeats of such a spook can be felt. It is the action, so to speak, that is felt, and it doesn't mean that an actual heart is beating in the replica body. At the end of a performance, the shade will disintegrate and the medium's weight will be restored. The material exuded from a medium is called ectoplasm and is often just an amorphous mass, but it can assume the likeness of the departed, even though perhaps only as a face in it. In the case of the more substantial and complete materializations, the apparitions may be quite lifelike in every detail of apparel and action. The figure may bring a pet or pets with it, and may work secondary seeming miracles, like producing flowers, cloth, etc., which will sometimes endure after the spook has disintegrated. So far, we have given attention to spiritualistic phenomena, nearly all of which are manifest in the presence of or through a medium. A medium has three modes of function, depending on what's happening. One is to be clairvoyantly or clairaudiently aware, so that he or she can see and hear in the astral light, or see a person's aura. Secondly, mediums must be passively sensitive and be able to go easily into trance. And thirdly, be able to make available energy and or ethereal and bodily substance to enable materializations to occur. Now, not all mediums, of course, possess all three abilities. The going into trance is the commonest way of their coming under control, as it is called, by a spirit guide, who often brings other spirits to communicate. In this way, the medium makes available her lower principles to the visitants by, so to speak, evacuating them, him or herself. It is an exercise in rendering oneself completely passive. The medium can in no way determine which entity shall manifest, nor what it shall do. There is a law which, to some extent, protects mediums from possession by entities of too undesirable a kind. The law is that like, in this case, attracts like. A pure, kindly, well-meaning medium attracting the better-natured spirits. However, any medium is liable to possession by the less desirable entities and is powerless to resist, except insofar as the ego might intervene. In itself, however, mediumistic ability is not necessarily anything to be deplored, but it is important that it be brought under control and used at will. If this is not possible, it is desirable from the point of view of real spiritual development that its use should be discontinued. HBB was herself mediumistic when young. At an early age, she was the center, mostly passive, it seems, of all kinds of phenomena, the nature of which, for example, automatic writing, she herself didn't understand, but later she learned to bring her powers under control. And instead of being a medium, she became a magician. She could control the forces playing through her. And this is not strictly true. The forces are elementals, and she learned to control them. With a consideration of the control of elementals, we are now starting to deal with the second aspect of the subject of this section, psychism. This covers a wide range of happenings, for example, out-of-the-body experiences, phenomena involving elementals and the astral light, hypnotism and mesmerism, extrasensory perception, and the use of the developed will. Out-of-the-body experiences include those of so-called astral travel, which involves several sorts of experiences. It's not possible here to cite many examples, but out-of-the-body experiences are commonly those where one sees one's own body from outside. This seems to occur in various circumstances, for example, sometimes in motor car accidents, when victims see their bodies lying on the road receiving attention. And this seems strange to them, as they feel to be among the onlookers, yet no one takes any notice of them. HPB had this experience to an extraordinary extent. She said, "I once slept for 11 weeks believing myself to be awake the whole time and walking around like a ghost of Pontoise, without being able to understand why no one else appeared to see me and to answer me. I was entirely unaware that I was liberated from my old carcass, which at the time, however, was a little younger. That was the beginning of my studies." That's a quotation from Collected Writings, 2nd volume, page 206. What is happening in these cases depends to some extent on the distance one is away from the body. For example, quoting again, when a man visits another in his astral body, it's the linga sharira which goes, but this can't happen at any great distance. When a man thinks of another at a distance very intently, he sometimes appears to that person. In this case, it is the Mayavi Rupa, which is created by unconscious Kriya Shakti, and the man himself is not conscious of appearing. If he were, and projected his Mayavi Rupa consciously, he would be an adept. No two persons can simultaneously be conscious of one another's presence unless one be an adept. That's from the 3rd volume of The Secret Doctrine, page 588. Now, these two extracts answer many questions on this topic, but obviously not all. The Mayavi Rupa, or body of illusion, is a mentally created form, usually, but not necessarily, in the likeness of its projector. Phenomena involving elementals embrace a whole range of very unusual happenings, amounting to what anyone ignorant of their cause would call miracles. These include the dematerialization of objects, their transportation and rematerialization in some other place. Among the eddy phenomena was one where a very large stone from outside the house was transported into the seance room without anyone knowing until the seance was over. In the Theosophical Society's early history, there's a story of a handsome teacup with a lid, which HPB caused to be found in the roots of a tree to accommodate an unexpected guest at a picnic. This cup of very unusual design, was a replica of the others being used and was additional to the set. It still exists in the Society's Museum at Adyar. Hypnotism involves the divorcement of a person's higher principles from the lower ones, so that the latter will do the bidding of the hypnotizer. This is akin to sleepwalking, where a person's body will be about some business of its own without any consciousness of what is happening on the part of its true egoic owner. Mesmerism is affecting by strong repeated suggestions of a person's mental principle, such that in turn the astral body, either his bodily condition or his behavior or both, are affected in the way suggested by the mesmerizer. HPB says that mesmerism, but not hypnotism, can be a legitimate and effective means of healing. It does not render the inner principles passive, whereas hypnotism does, and the latter is thereby dangerous because it is subject to abuse. Hypnotism is therefore undesirable and even evil. Using a technique similar to these, an adept can affect the minds not only of single individuals but whole groups, producing the most powerful and wonderful mayas, illusions. People can be made to see as vividly as any real life scene or circumstance things which are in fact not there, or not see things which are there. This can be done even when the adept is at a distance from those he is affecting. Phenomena, apart from the spiritualistic ones involving the astral light, are such, for example, as psychometry. This is an ability possessed by some people who, on being given something like a stone or a piece of clothing associated with a place or person, can see scenes and events complete with buildings and even people, and something of their history. In this way they can see back into remote ages. The history of everything is indelibly recorded in the astral light, and inheres in that thing indefinitely. Extrasensory perception, ESP, is usually the result of more or less developed psychic sensitivity, clairvoyance or clairaudience. Our physical sense organs have their counterparts in our astral bodies, and when these senses are developed such that they can operate independently of the physical senses, then their possessor becomes clairvoyant and or clairaudient. With these faculties working, a man can see, for example with his eyes bandaged, the contents of a sealed envelope. Another aspect of ESP, which at times has received much attention and scientific investigation, is thought transference. Usually the investigation involves a sender in one room and a receiver in another. The sender conjures up in his mind, as intensely as he can, a test image, usually a geometrical figure, and the receiver tries to receive what is being transmitted. And there's enough evidence to show that this can be done correctly beyond the reasonable limits of pure chance. Apart from laboratory experiments, there is in some of the Theosophical Society's early literature, received from adepts, evidence of abundant and very accurate thought transference between master and chela. Instances of this are in precipitated letters, of which there are many examples. Apart from these, HPB has told us about the astral telegraph, which operated between her master and herself. she would be alerted that a message was on the way and to prepare herself to receive it. She knew when the necessary astral currents had been set up and was then ready to communicate with her distant master, both receiving and sending information. This is a brief outline of the range of phenomena, both spiritualistic and otherwise, of which we now have some rational explanations. In no other place, in no other literature, is there so much information given from which we can derive so many and such feasible explanations as in that of Theosophy. This, as we have seen, is also the case with the after-death states, and with the vast universal evolutionary scheme and much else. The esoteric science makes available to modern man answers which have never been available before to a wide range of questions which now particularly he is asking. Before finishing this cassette, we should perhaps draw some conclusions from the data given us about spiritualistic phenomena, which might, however, be unpalatable to many, especially those who see in them evidence of survival after death. Here we must bear in mind 2 points. One is our key idea of life everlasting, and the other is the mortality of the personal principles of man. In these terms, the ego, the divine man, is to all intents and purposes immortal, while the person, or the personal man, body and soul, is mortal. His body disintegrates after death, along with his linga sharira, his astral body, and his prana principle. His fourth, karma principle, and the lower elements of his mind associated with it, persist for a while in Kamaloka, but then they too disintegrate, leaving behind them only the skandhas, the conditioned life atoms. It is only these which persist of the personal man, and they condition the next successive personality in the chain of egoic existences at physical level. We therefore have 3 associated aspects of continuation. One is the chain of physically inherited characteristics persisting through successive generations, modified secondarily by the skandhas. The second is the conditioned karma-manasic soul, the mento-emotional complex, the inner character of the new person, the character of which is also determined by the skandhas. And thirdly, there is the persisting ego, reaping the spiritual harvest of the experiences of its ephemeral personalities as they periodically pass through their short times on earth. We must see from this that when therefore a person is dead, he or she is dead, and can thereafter no longer affect events on earth. No dead general can fight a campaign. No dead artist can create another masterpiece. No dead musician can write an immortal symphony. People can only affect the present or the future by the effects of what they do when alive. There are some seeming exceptions to this rule. People can apparently be conditioned to reflect something of the genius of the talented dead. This is a process that the Russians who have practiced it call reincarnation. See Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder. This process is one whereby people become mediumistic to the astral light or karmalokic remains of the dead, on whom they concentrate intensely long periods. There are spontaneously mediumistic people who manifest something of the qualities of dead authors or musicians, but it's not the authors or musicians themselves who again manifest, but a reflection of them, so to speak. They will never do any original creative work again, because the egoic creator cannot manifest again except through a new body, a new person, when the world may enjoy the work of a seemingly new genius. This is the end of the first part of Cassette 11. Cassette 11, second side. Spiritualism and Psychism. On the first side of this cassette we covered this subject discursively and superficially, merely making the point that esoteric science has something important to say on this subject, and something which is not said so explicitly nor so fully anywhere else. We now hope to show that not only is this the case, but that what esoteric science has to say is consistent with its massive universal teachings. It is further claimed that these teachings are not only comprehensive, but that much of what they tell us is unique and has not been made public before. These unique aspects include much of the information given us on the elementals and the astral light, on the after-death states of so much interest to us all, and on the inner nature of man and of cosmos, on cosmogony, and on the triple evolutionary scheme. With all this, and especially what we have been told of the constitution of man and of the after-death states, we are in a position to understand spiritualism and psychism in a way which would have been impossible otherwise. Now, this introduction has been made so as to emphasize the importance of what is now to be said. Further, on the first side, we said that much of what was said there would be justified on this side, specific references being made to the literature. Referring to the marvelous and numerous phenomena which occurred at the Eddy farmstead at Chittenden, as reported in H.S. Olcott's People from the Other World, amongst which phenomena were the apparitional forms of a number of people whom H.P.B. had known in her life, was one of her uncle. Of this she had this to say: even the materialized form of my uncle at the Eddies was the picture. It was I who sent it out from my own mind, as I had come out to make experiments without telling it to anyone. It was like an empty outer envelope of my uncle that I seemed to throw on the medium's astral body. I saw and followed the process. I knew Will Eddy was a genuine medium, and the phenomenon was as real as it could be. And therefore, when days of trouble came for him, I defended him in the papers. And this passage ends with, we Theosophists, and especially occultists, must never lose sight of the profound axiom of the esoteric doctrine, which teaches us that it is we, the living, that are drawn toward the spirits, but that the latter can never, even though they would, descend to us, or rather into our sphere. That's from the Collected Writings, Vol. 1, pages 35 and 36. And the statements made in this extract are, in essence, repeated many times in other places. We should notice that the apparition of her uncle was only a picture, a mere simulacrum of her uncle, even though its appearance was lifelike in every detail as to features and clothing. Colonel Olcott, who investigated the numerous phenomena which took place at Chittenden and elsewhere, gives further evidence that such apparitions were, in fact, empty shells. He describes in one instance a materialized face, complete in all respects, which he had the opportunity to examine closely. He saw through the open eyelids that the eye sockets were empty. And the other point made is that spirits, and here real spirits, egos are meant, can never descend to the physical plane. If we would communicate with them, we must be able to elevate our consciousness to their level, the higher mental. Another interesting statement is that HPB could watch the process of manifestation in the inner planes. It could also be construed from her mention of experimenting that she could not only affect the apparitional happenings, but make them occur. This is borne out in a note where she says, "For I was sent from Paris on purpose to America to prove the phenomena and their reality, and show the fallacy of the spiritualistic theories of spirits. But how could I do it best? I didn't want people at large to know that I could produce the same thing at will." That's a quotation from Collected Writings, Vol 1, page 73. Now, if we can believe HPB, this is a supremely important statement made in the present study of the esoteric science, because it validates so many of the statements we have been quoting from other source books. If it were not true, it would not validate all or even much of what we have hitherto said about the hidden side of cosmos and man's latent faculties. But if it is true, it is an important corroboration. Now, concerning this power to evoke so-called spirits, we have the following explanatory passage. The exercise of magical power is the exercise of natural powers, but superior to the ordinary functions of nature. A miracle is not a violation of the laws of nature, except for ignorant people. Magic is but a science, a profound knowledge of the occult forces in nature and of the laws governing the visible or the invisible world. Spiritualism in the hands of an adept becomes magic, for he is learned in the art of blending together the laws of nature without breaking any of them, and thereby violating nature. In the hands of an experienced medium, spiritualism becomes unconscious sorcery, for by allowing himself to become the helpless tool of a variety of spirits of whom he knows nothing save what the latter permit him to know, he opens, unknown to himself, a door of communication between the two worlds, through which emerge the blind forces of nature lurking in the astral light, as well as good and bad spirits. HPB goes on to say in the same passage that a powerful mesmerizer, learned in his science, is a magician, and instances some such men. She says they have become initiates into the mystery of our Mother Nature. And such men, she says, control spirits instead of allowing their subjects or themselves to be controlled by them. And spiritualism is safe in their hands. That's from Collected Writings, Volume 1, page 137. The factors involved, and therefore the occult explanation of what is actually happening in cases of spiritualistic phenomena, depend on the kind of manifestation. Quoting, "The causes of such manifestations are by no means so simple as the spiritualists would like to believe. Foremost of all, the deus ex machina of the so-called materializations is usually the astral body or double of the medium or of someone present. This astral body is also the producer or operative force in the manifestation of slate writing. As to the causes of what happens in other instances of materializations and other kinds of phenomena, HBB says that depends on the nature of the manifestations. Sometimes it is the astral remains, the karmalokic shells of the vanished personalities that were. At other times, elementals. The conscious individuality of the disembodied cannot materialize, nor can it return from its own mental devachanic sphere to the plane of terrestrial objectivity. In answer to a question, but many of communications received from the spirits show not only intelligence but a knowledge of facts not known to the medium, and sometimes even not consciously present to the mind of the investigator or any of those who compose the audience. And in reply she said, "Now this doesn't necessarily prove that the intelligence and knowledge you speak of belong to spirits or emanate from disembodied souls. Somnambulists have been known to compose music and poetry and to solve mathematical problems while in their trance state without ever having learned music or mathematics. And others answered intelligently questions put to them, even in several cases spoke languages such as Hebrew and Latin of which they were entirely ignorant when awake, and all this in a state of profound sleep. Will you then maintain that this was caused by spirits?" That's from the Key, chapter 2. As to how these spirit abilities could be explained, it was said, "We assert that the divine spark in man, being one and identified in its essence with the universal spirit, our spiritual self, is practically omniscient, but it can't manifest its knowledge owing to the impediments of matter. Now, the more these impediments are removed, in other words, the more the physical body is paralyzed as to its own independent activity and consciousness, as in deep sleep or deep trance, or again in illness, the more fully can the inner self manifest on this plane. This is our explanation of those truly wonderful phenomena of a high order in which undeniable intelligence and knowledge are exhibited. As to the lower order of manifestations, such as physical phenomena and the platitudes and common talk of the general spirit, to explain even the most important of the teachings we hold upon the subject would take up more space and time than can be allotted to it at present. That's from the Key, chapter 2. HBB nevertheless explains further that all the teachings of occultism in the matter of phenomena are based on, quoting, that immortal individuality, and that ordinarily there is confusion between personality and individuality. Our teachings, she says, insist upon the identity of spirit and matter, and though we say that spirit is potential matter and matter simply crystallized spirit, just as ice is solidified steam, yet since the original and eternal condition of the all is not spirit, but super-spirit, so to speak, visible and solid matter being simply its periodical manifestation, we maintain that the term spirit can only be applied to the true individuality. And that's also from the Key, chapter 2. Now, this latter is a vital point in understanding reincarnation. It means that the personality, that is, what we feel ourselves to be during earth life, never reincarnates. It is the ego, the individuality, that is the reincarnating entity, except in rare cases, as when children die young. The new personality is merely the effect of and is conditioned by the previous one. It is not its continuation. The question of the individuality being the persisting entity and not the ephemeral personality was the gist of another question answered as follows. Before I can answer you, we must agree upon what you mean by I, or ego. We distinguish between the simple fact of self-consciousness, the simple feeling that I am I, and the complex thought that I am Mr. Smith or Mrs. Brown. Believing as we do in a series of births for the same ego, or reincarnation, this distinction is the fundamental pivot of the whole idea. You see, Mr. Smith really means a long series of daily experiences strung together by the thread of memory, and forming what Mr. Smith calls himself. But none of these experiences is really the I, or the ego, nor do they give Mr. Smith the feeling that he is himself, for he forgets the greater part of his daily experiences, and they produce the feeling of egoity in him only while they last. We therefore distinguish between this bundle of experiences, which we call the false, because so finite and evanescent, personality, and that element in man to which the feeling I am I is due. It is the I am I which we call the true individuality, and we say that this ego or individuality plays, like an actor, many parts on the stage of life, appearing in a different role every earth life. That's from the Key, chapter 2. Now, this extract is important in that it illustrates the importance of the ego and the impermanence of its successive personalities. When we bear in mind that the 1.5 principles, karma manas, of the erstwhile man, that remain in karma loka after his death, are themselves the reliquae of the mortal soul of the personality, we see how far removed they are from being the spirits which spiritualists believe they are. It is perhaps relevant to inquire here, what is the nature of the remembrance and self-consciousness of the shell? According to the masters, it is no better than a reflected or borrowed light. That's from Mahatma Letters, page 173. Then there are other factors not normally taken into account which militate against the ordinary explanations of spiritualistic and sometimes psychic phenomena. For instance, W.Q. Judge writes, with regard to the astral plane being a more subtle order of matter, this truth is often denied by clairvoyants and untrained seers. They do not distinguish between the psychic senses and the spiritual. They can see through gross matter, such as a wall, the human body, and so forth, as if it were glass. But they can't see through astral substance, and hence they believe its forms and all the pictures and shapes in the astral light to be real. Only the adept sees through these illusions, which are far more powerful because composed of a subtle order of matter, subtle energies, fine forces, and have a highly increased rate of power over grosser ones. The adept has at his command the rate of vibration which dispels them or drives them asunder. That's a quotation from Letters That Have Helped Me, page 27. There is much else in theosophical literature to warn us against the construction as explanations put upon a very wide range of phenomena by even the most distinguished spiritualists, some of which took the form of the most intimate and to them significant personal experiences. Interested students are referred to such stories as those in Collected Writings, Vol 6, page 127, to the Personal Memories of HPB by Mary Neff, pages 18 to 22, and a reply to Stainton Moses in Collected Writings, Vol 4, pages 588 and 598, etc. The purport of this cassette is to give the explanations for spiritualistic and psychic phenomena according to the teachings of esoteric science. And first, we have the part played by the elementals. Quoting, "The production of phenomena is not possible without either the aid or disturbance of elementals. Each phenomenon entails the expenditure of great force and also brings on a correspondingly great disturbance of the elemental world, which disturbance is beyond the limit natural to ordinary human life." This extract goes on to say that just because the production of phenomena involves this disturbance of the elementals, adepts will seldom use their powers to do anything abnormal. And further it says that this disturbance of the elementals can affect the operations of karma, particularly in the case of those engaged in a study of occultism. And then we have the statement that we quoted earlier, "There is not a single thing going on about us, no matter what, that elementals are not concerned in, because they constitute a necessary part of nature, just as important as the nerve currents in your body." That's from the 10th volume of Collected Writings, page 271. In no one place in the literature are there single passages explaining completely what happens in the production of phenomena. The story has to be pieced together, as far as it may be, from many statements. The majority of the important ones have been quoted in cassettes 4 and 5 on the Akasha and the astral light and elements and elementals. We have to bear in mind the qualities, for example, of the elementals. They can, we are told, read thoughts. That is, they can acquaint themselves of an unuttered wish. They can enliven thought forms, as they do when they assume fairy and other such forms. They can be made to animate otherwise inanimate objects, bringing them apparently to life. They can manipulate astral forms to produce sounds, table raps, etc. And they can operate in the fourth dimension of matter. For example, tie knots on an endless cord, or dematerialize, transport to another place, and rematerialize solid objects. They can enliven the photographic images in the astral light. They produce the grand phenomena of the firmament in the wind and rain. They are the agents behind volcanoes, earthquakes, and even play a part in epidemics. This catalogue is not complete. We really only have to remember that there is not a single thing going on about us, no matter what, that elementals are not concerned in. And we can fill in the blanks for ourselves. Regarding the nature and function of elementaries in phenomena, we have to remember what they are. The word is sometimes used for the combined karma monastic principles surviving in the karma loka after the death of a person, and the disintegration of the physical body and the astral double, the linga sharira, and the withdrawal into devachan of the upper triad. Because after the death struggle the spiritual essence from the deceased's experience is assimilated into the higher manas, what is left is the ordinary, selfish and often animalistic residue of emotions and thoughts. Elementaries, therefore, manifest the less desirable elements of human nature. A description of them in the Theosophical Glossary was quoted on the first side of this cassette, but we can notice additionally that elementaries can maintain their life by vampirizing the vital principles of mediums and others. Being possessed of the residual karma monastic qualities of the man in life, they retain his personal memories. And it's interesting to note, and here we quote, "The shell of a highly intelligent, learned, but utterly unspiritual man who died a natural death will last longer, and the shadow of his own memory helping, that shadow, which is the refuse of the sixth principle left in the fifth, he may deliver discourses through trance speakers and repeat parrot-like that which he knew of and thought much over during his lifetime." That's from Mahatma Letters, page 173. Further, elementaries can use the elementals to produce phenomena which, by themselves, they couldn't otherwise do. They can thereby cause, via a medium's astral substance, their form to appear at seances. They can also, as we have seen, inspire living people of similar tendencies and who are sensitive to them to commit atrocities and bestialities in which the elementaries revel. An essential factor in the occult explanations of spiritualistic and psychic phenomena is the akasha, the homogeneous force substance, the base of all manifestation, and the astral light, the lower levels of differentiated akasha, the home of the elements and the elementals. As well as being the matrix of all substance, akasha is also, as explained in cassette 4, the fundamental agent for the manifestation of all force in the non-physical realms. It is even the upadi, the base of divine thought. That is, it is that through which divine ideation is given effect. The astral light is its derivative, which constitutes in itself the inner worlds, directly behind and intimately associated with the physical world. Psychic phenomena and what we call magic, in both physical and non-physical terms, results from this inner to outer activity, about which we say something later. It would perhaps be as well to reiterate what is said about the nature and function of the astral light in the economy of inner nature. It is the invisible region that surrounds our globe as every other. It is conditioned by our thoughts and feelings. It interpenetrates everything. It is an aspect of akasha. It is an agent through which psychic forces operate. In it is the indelible record of everything that has happened on earth. It reflects the future as the effect of past causes. It reflects but reverses everything in the planes above and below it. It is the realm of illusion and hallucination of the psychic clairvoyant. Using the information given us about the constitution of man, the elementals, shells and elementaries, and the astral light, we can answer most questions concerning clairvoyance, clairaudience, psychometry, psychokinesis, thought transference, ESP generally, fortune-telling, divination, materializations, hypnotism, the power of mayas, magical performances, healings, and so on and so on. All of this is far too much to be dealt with at all adequately in this section. The best we can do is to apply the principles to a few hypothetical specimen cases. For example, what is it that speaking through an entranced medium demonstrates so much of the personal characteristics and knowledge of someone recently or even long since dead? In the case of someone recently deceased who died prematurely, it can be the ex-personality, complete but less a physical body. In this case, there's no difficulty in accounting for an evinced knowledge of personal matters and idiosyncrasies. In the case of the coming through of someone elderly having died a normal death from old age and not too recently dead, it could be the shell enlivened by the medium's vitality or by elementals. If the person were long dead, it could be an astral light impression, the image of the deceased, complete with stored thoughts and feelings, revitalized by elementals. Poltergeist phenomena are obviously the activities essentially of elementals, but with a personal coloration. This is evidenced by their somewhat malevolent mischief. The entity is quite obviously quite irresponsible, but not vicious, in that, unlike elementaries, they do not inspire their victims to vice or crime. They mostly haunt adolescents and may take something of their mischievous activities from them, quite unwittingly as far as the adolescents are concerned. Materializations of people, as in the case of H.P.B.'s uncle who appeared at the Eddy homestead, are astral pictures projected objectively from the material of the medium's astral and physical bodies. The image may be according to a picture in the mind of someone, like H.P.B. in this case, in the circle. In the case of transportation of objects, the playing of instruments and other such happenings with no apparent cause, those with clairvoyant sight see that semi-materialized forms of spooks are the effective agents. Then they play the instruments. They carry ethereal and even physical objects or manipulate materials to cause a variety of effects. In cases of psychokinesis, physical objects can be moved and, as seen clairvoyantly, to be so moved by semi-materialized hands. All these ethereal but effective bodies or limbs are produced by elementals. The forms they assume are thought forms in the minds of an operator or those present at the seance, or pictures in the astral light. For example, the materialization of an historical personage from centuries ago, whose Kamarupa could not still be persisting, would probably be an enlivened astral light image. We are told that Kamarupas do not normally persist for much longer than about 30 years, usually much less, unless they are sustained by someone still alive who is mediumistic and closely associated with them. The investigation of psychic-type phenomena brings us to a consideration of what, throughout the centuries, has been known as magic. The use of supernatural powers to produce physical or psychological effects. We have used the word magic previously in this cassette, but without explanation. It's necessary now to say something more about it, to bring it into the realms of rationality, or at least feasibility, or we could run the risk of all our other explanations being dismissed as purely superstitious, and all that we have so far written regarded as mere make-believe at the worst, or just fine theory at best. In the occult philosophy, because of the essential unity underlying the whole universe, there can be nothing supernatural or outside or above it in any respect. Nature, taken as a whole, is one. If there could be anything super to nature, for example above it, there would be more than one thing. So magic, if there is such a thing, must operate within the confines of objective and or subjective nature. We also made the point on the first side of this cassette that phenomena could be produced at the will of a trained or otherwise competent operator. A common example of this is the hypnotizer, who can make his subjects do what he tells or wills them to do without their apparently having any choice in the matter, and being unaware afterwards of what they did. Even the metal-bending propensities of young people that we are now hearing about are examples of a form of magic, but in these cases it's not wholly under the control of the operator's will. Putting the matter into a more credible context, even though quite theoretically for most of us, we have been told, quoting, that the cornerstone of magic is an intimate, practical knowledge of magnetism and electricity, their qualities, correlations, and potencies. Especially necessary is a familiarity with their effects in and upon the animal kingdom and man. There are occult properties in many other minerals, equally strange with that in the lodestone, which all practitioners of magic must know, and of which so-called exact science is wholly ignorant. Plants also have like mystical properties in a most wonderful degree, and the secrets of the herbs, of dreams and enchantments are only lost to European science, and, useless to say, too, are unknown to it, except in a few marked instances, such as opium and hashish. Yet the physical effects of even these few upon the human system are regarded as evidences of a temporary mental disorder. Some secrets are still preserved, and those who are aware of the nature of soma know the properties of other plants as well. To sum up all in a few words, magic is spiritual wisdom. Nature, the material ally, pupil and servant of the magician. One common vital principle pervades all things, and this is controllable by the perfected human will. An adept can stimulate the movements of the natural forces in plants and animals in a preternatural degree. Such experiments are not obstructions of nature, but quickenings. The conditions of intenser vital action are given. The adept can control the sensations and alter the conditions of the physical and astral bodies of other persons not adepts. He can also govern and employ, as he chooses, the spirits of the elements. He cannot control the immortal spirit of any human being, living or dead, for all such spirits are alike sparks of the divine essence, and not subject to any foreign domination. There are two kinds of seership, that of the soul, psychic, and that of the spirit, egoic. Now this is a significant difference. The psychic is subject to incorrect vision for various reasons, mostly to do with the mind, but the spiritual or egoic seer, the adept, is not. His visions will be seen as clear as truth itself, uncoloured and undistorted, whereas the clairvoyant, unable to control the vibrations of the astral waves, will perceive but more or less broken images through the medium of the brain. That's a quotation from the second volume of Isis, pages 589 to 591. Now, these extracts have, of necessity, been shorn of much illustrative and justificatory matter for brevity. The student is advised to read the reference for himself wherever possible. Two important points arise from what has been said about adepts. The first is that it must be fairly obvious that if such adepts exist, the production of any psychic phenomena is within their powers. We know such phenomena occur, and we know that it occurs in the presence of some, maybe a few individuals, mostly fortuitously. But is it beyond acceptance that there could be individuals who could produce the same and possibly many more phenomena at will? Esoteric science, occultism, maintains that the processes of evolution, in the normal fruition of their stages, must and do produce not only the superhuman beings we have referred to as Jan Chohans, but men in physical bodies possessed of great powers far beyond the commonly accepted norm. The occult student claims that the science he studies, so much as has been made public, derives from such great men. They know what they talk about and can demonstrate their abilities. There is no need to believe any creed or dogma concerning those things. Now, however, we are beginning to touch upon the subject matter for the next two cassettes. And this is the end of cassette 11.